Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Indigenes. Our guest today is the Executive Director for the Space Advisory General Council, working with the United Nations, and has spent time on research with astronauts from all over the world. She's worked with NASA, ESA, and various space bodies, but without taking too much more time in this introduction, I'm going to let her introduce herself to you. And Indian Genes very proudly presents our guest today, Nikol Koleva. Hello, Nicola, and from everyone here at Indian Genes and India, a big warm welcome to you and thank you for joining us today.
Hello, thank you so much for the invitation. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Great. In fact, I was just talking just before you came in here. I was in my introduction. I kept it short. I thought that it would be better probably for you to introduce yourself to us. Let us know a little bit more about what you're doing. So, Nicole, let me give you the screen and you can tell us everything that you've been up to.
Absolutely, that's quite a lot. So it might be a lengthy introduction. But as you already mentioned, I am currently the executive director of the Space Generation Advisory Council, which is currently the biggest network for students and young professionals who are interested in space around the world. It originates from the United Nations, and currently, we have over 35,000 members in 165 countries. And of course, India is one of them. And I know we have a lot of active members in India. So shout out to all our members there. And I hope they're watching. But apart from SGAC, my background is actually in psychology. So I studied clinical and counseling psychology first in the UK. And then I moved to Vienna to do my master's. And whilst I was doing my studies, I got very interested in space psychology. So I was, exploring what space psychology was and exploring different topics. And I got very into it. I started doing research with some astronauts and started getting into a few aspects of astronauts' health. And that's how actually I got into the space sector. I started getting some internships, and eventually how I reached to SGAC. So it's been quite a journey, but everything actually started from psychology. Apart from my, let's say, professional background, I'm originally from Bulgaria, but I moved to the UK when I was 10 years old, and that most of my education was in the UK. And after that, I moved to Vienna, and I'm currently based here where the SGAC offices are.
That's amazing, Nicole. And when I was reading about the organization, I think we would like to know a lot more about psychology and space psychology. But if you could give us a little bit of a breakdown on what SGAC is exactly doing. And as you mentioned, there are a lot of young kids in India, there are college students who are very interested in contributing in some way to space or just as enthusiasts. So
Yeah.
if you could speak to them and how exactly is this organization set up, that would be help to them if they are interested.
SGAC is probably one of the best places for aspiring individuals who are wanting to get in space, or already space professionals, young space professionals who are looking to really develop their careers and get a bigger network in space. As I mentioned, SGAC was created out of the United Nations back in 1999 at a meeting called Unispace 3. And actually, you could see the declaration of that in the background here. But at the this meeting and in the UN, the let's say founding fathers decided that the voice of the young generation was not really heard at very important platforms such as the UN or other important forums. And this is how SGAC was created. So SGAC was created with the mission to be the voice of the young generation, to make sure that their opinions are heard and their vision is heard, because after all, the vision of the young generation is really related to the future of the world. And since those important decisions are taken in the UN or other platforms, we need to know what the future generations want their future to be. And that's what the mission of SGAC is, and it has been for the past 25 years. This year we celebrate our 25th anniversary, and for the past 25 years, the mission hasn't really changed. So we try to present that voice at different forums and make sure we connect global young space professionals. We do that through a number of pillars. At the moment, we have 5 core pillars. I would say the biggest pillar right now would be events. So we have events on a global, regional, and local level, where the global level, it's really events that we organize in conjunction with bigger space events. For example, we have the Space Generation Congress coming up now in conjunction with IAC. We have SGFF, which is in conjunction with Space Symposium, and SGX, which is in conjunction with Satellite in DC. Apart from the global scale, let's say the structure is replicated then on a regional level. So our regions are divided as according to the United Nations region, so Middle East, Europe, North Central America and the Caribbean, Asia Pacific. And the regional workshops really aim to foster the connections of the space sector and the young space professionals within that region, so between different countries. And it's a two-day workshop. And then on a local level, I would say it's a smaller event, or it can also be a partnered event, where we really try to bring together the local space community, so those individuals can network between each other. And those events are really just per country, let's say SG India, SG France, SG Spain, depending on, on the bids, to be honest. So events, I would say, is one of our most active pillars. People can get engaged in many, many ways. You can volunteer as part of a organizing team, so you contribute to the programming, you get to invite speakers and network with different speakers, you get to see how an event is organized, work with our finance team on the budgeting, and really get some experience in how bigger events are organized. Or you can volunteer as a manager and kind of propose your own ideas and shape the vision of the event itself. Apart from events, I would say our second biggest pillar is scholarships, and perhaps one of the best pillars of SGAC. So we provide over, I would say, 200 scholarships per year, and our scholarships really vary in nature. We have scholarships which are purely funding, so we provide funding to students and young professionals to come to our conferences or other conferences. So of course we have many, many scholarships for SGC and IAC. I think over 70 scholarship opportunities for the coming SGC and IAC in Milan. And then we have scholarships to other events which are not organized by us, but to our partners. So, for example, we just had really, really fantastic programming with UK Space Agency and Secure World Foundation for their sustainability summit in Tokyo. It was really fantastic, and we managed to secure a lot of funding with the help of UKSA and bring, I think it was over 20 students and young professionals to Tokyo to attend the conference. And we have many different also scholarships opportunities, which are not precisely funding, but they provide different opportunities. I think on top of my head, one really fantastic one is the opportunity to do research in zero gravity. So we have a really great partnership program with the Aurelia Institute. in the US, and every year we do a competition, and the winners get to travel to the US and do some research in zero gravity flights, which are organized by Aurelia, but also by the Zero G company. Another really fantastic opportunity is a great scholarship in collaboration with the US government and the United Nations. So UNOSA, the Office for Outer Space Affairs, and it's a really great essay competition. And the winners of that essay competition get to attend space camp in the US. So it really depends on, let's say, the interest of the audience, whether they're purely looking for funding, whether they're looking for more research opportunities and getting more hands-on experience and involvement. But I would say that our scholarship programs are definitely one of the best things about SGAC, as they provide really a chance to a lot of students to participate in different things. Our third pillar focuses much more on tangible, let's say, things. It's related a lot more to research, and it's our project groups. So our project groups, I would say, are essentially research groups. We have 11 major research groups, and they vary in topics. So we have, for example, space medicine, small satellites, gender and diversity, all with a focus on space, of course. But within those, let's say, research groups, different members can join depending on their interest, and then they can create their own research projects that they conduct with other members, which, of course, they then get to publish or present at different conferences. So this is, I would say, a lot more tangible in the sense that there's physical outcomes that then get presented at different forums. Then we have our policy and advocacy platform. So I would say this is the pillar that's most connected to the United Nations. So our policy and advocacy platform basically works all year round to present the united policy positions of the young generation. We pick one very important topic per year. So one policy position gets worked on for an entire year. And then there's a white paper written based on that, and a report which then gets used, for example, at different forums. We, of course, report it to the UN, but we also try to present it at different policy conferences and other forums, and, of course, encourage other member states in the UN to think on that and potentially think about the perspective of the young generation. So I would say this is another very, very important pillar. And of course, for people who are more interested in law and are not exactly sure how that's relevant in space and want to explore that, I would say this this platform is really fantastic, because it allows you to learn about space policy. Of course, if you're not sure if you want to go down that path professionally or even to study it, and you get to network with a lot of other people who are either working in that sector or trying to explore like yourself. So it's really a fantastic way to get involved. And last but not least, we have our education and professional development platform, which one aims to provide educational resources to our members and provide different opportunities for courses and or interesting things that they could learn and get involved in. And to provide mentorship, so professional development to our members, where they basically get paired up with experts, and then they go through a mentorship program and get to meet with their experts and get advised on either career choices or personal development, really depending on their need. But I would say also that's a really great way to get involved, especially for somebody who doesn't really have that many contacts in space. and really is looking for a mentor. I'm a really huge advocate for mentors because I've had fantastic mentors. So I know how important it can be to have a great mentor. And I could say that our mentors really do advocate for members. We always have our mentors, take an active part and make sure that the mentees get connected or at least get some type of guidance. So these are the five pillars that SGAC focuses on. But of course, surrounding all of these pillars, there's many events and other activities happening. So really, our work is quite broad. I would say that anybody who is interested in space and in some capacity can find a way to get involved with SGAC. And I think one thing that's really important to mention is that we are a volunteer-run organization. So a lot of the work that you're hearing about is done by volunteers. We have, of course, 4 permanent staff, and I'm, of course, part of the permanent staff. But we have a lot of volunteers who work in different teams, be it PR and communications or events team or a scholarships team, who really invest their time and make sure SGAC is running. So I have to say it's really thanks to them that we are doing such amazing work. And the sheer volume of the work is so big is because they are extremely active and extremely dedicated. So I guess that's another way that anybody could get involved, is be part of the teams and volunteer with the teams, because that's really where you get the hands-on experience. I think final thing I'd like to say, I guess, on this topic is, with any organization like us, the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. So of course we have more active volunteers and less active volunteers, but you tend to notice that those volunteers who really put their time in and dedicate a lot of effort into SGAC get the most out of it. They get the most contacts, the most opportunities. So for me, it's really that whatever you put in, you get out of SGAC. So it just depends on each individual and how much they would like to dedicate to their own development.
Right. And I've been following SGAC's work. You guys are doing a lot of amazing work all over the world. But when you mentioned about volunteers or people wanting to join, is there an age limit to this? Because when you split this down and call it Space Generation Advisory Council, is it promotional mainly to a particular group of people, for example, an age group? That's what I mean. And are you all looking at the youth to be more involved in bigger space decisions moving into the future? Or is this open to people who are probably below 18 or above 35?
Yeah, so unfortunately, there is an age limit. As I said, we were established out of the United Nations, and back in 1999, when Unispace 3 was held, the emphasis was really to create this advisory council to advise on what the youth would want. So they had to create some type of, let's say, definition of what we consider youth, because then it would just be everybody's opinion. So there really had to be a focus of what do we consider youth, and the age limit of 18 to 35 was placed back then. So SGAC members are only from 18 to 35, including 35. So you kind of age out on your 36th birthday. And this is really to remain focused on what the youth's opinion would be. I fully understand that, let's say, people get into space sometimes later on. There's enthusiasts who don't really want to get into space professionally, but are perhaps wanting to be involved at a bit of a later stage. But the focus really here on the ages, let's say, and the differences of experience, it's kind of assumed that if you are a little bit later in your life, you have a lot more experience, a lot more opportunities for professional development, opportunities to contribute, and of course, a little bit more wisdom. So it's assumed that we're wanting to give priority to the youth and making sure that they have equal opportunity and equal chance to get involved. And that's not to say that there are not other organizations who don't have age limits. So I'm sure there's really a way to get involved no matter what. But unfortunately, we really have that focus on the youth.
Right. And the good thing here, Nicole, is that about 90% of people listening to you on this podcast or the podcast that goes out, we go out to about 95 countries now. And the age group I was just looking at is somewhere between 12, 13 to about 24, 25. So I think we've got the demographics right, and you're absolutely the right person to be speaking to people who are listening. Now, Nicole, you also mentioned in your introduction when you were talking about psychology and you were dealing with a lot of astronauts earlier, and I do know that you are dealing with them now as well. But in a field like psychology, if you could let us know, we do have people who have either got into that field or are interested in it. How would you differentiate, or what is the difference between psychology that is conducted clinically for somebody who is not involved, for example, in missions to space or planned missions to space or future planned missions to space? So, when it comes to space psychology, how is it different from the other psychology which is clinically practiced?
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting question. I guess I would like to start with two big differentiations. Um, when you're thinking about normal clinical work and normal psychology, you are really thinking about clients or patients who are having mental health issues and they come to you because they want to, really, they need your help in coping with everyday life and dealing with issues that they're experiencing in their everyday life. So it's a lot more constant through time. Whereas when you're thinking about space psychology, you're thinking about dealing with an extreme environment for a shorter period of time. So I would say the mindset is really different in those two. With one, you're dealing with something that can come up every day, and with the other, you're really dealing with an extreme environment that is in a lot of cases unpredictable and can be fatal in many ways. So the nature of those two, I would say, is quite different. And I guess the other big difference is in your clinical work. So when I was doing my clinical experience, of course, people come to you for diagnosis and treatment. So they're trying to get help after noticing some type of an issue, and they come to you really for treatment. Whereas with space psychology, astronauts you're really working on prevention. You're making sure that the training goes well and you can prevent any issues arising during the mission. So I would say those two are pretty important differences that I think differentiate space psychology fundamentally from normal psychology. Not to say that there's not similarities, but I think even in the way you approach certain strategies, let's say in psychology, would be different when you're dealing with the two.
Right. And when it comes to training for astronauts, Nicole, is it mandatory that you have to undergo certain psychological tests that are tuned in such a way, as you said, it would be for eventualities or incidents that you would face that are unexpected, something in space? And how different are these tests when compared to, for example, psychological tests that are done for somebody on ground? And these days, you have a lot of the personality test or the personality type test, and uh, commonly known as psychometrics. So, do you also use psychometrics prior to an astronaut deciding that this is the career I want to choose, and then that the results of those tests can have an immediate impact on whether that career is chosen by that person or not? And how important are these tests?
Yeah, another very interesting question. So I would say this again varies from agency to agency. I feel, of course, there's a certain screening that is in some ways mandatory. So, on your first question, yes, astronauts do have psychological screenings to test for certain personality traits, to test, let's say, for certain characteristics. I think, let's say, there's not a set. test that indicates, okay, this person is going to be a great astronaut and this person won't be. But you do look for certain personality characteristics. Let's say people who are going to be able to cope well in isolation, who are in general feeling quite stable and okay in this isolated environments. Whereas if you're testing somebody, let's say on the ground, you're really testing to see for a certain diagnosis. So you're looking, does that person have some type of pathology? Is it some type of issue? Do we even need to diagnose? When we're talking about personality tests, I think when you relate personality tests to diagnosis, it's important to know. For example, we know that people who are high in neuroticism are sometimes at a higher risk for some certain mental health disorders. So you kind of take all of this into account when you're looking at the overall diagnosis. But for astronauts, I would say you're kind of looking for more particular characteristics. And I personally have a bit of a different opinion on this. So I know historically, let's say screenings have been looking for people, who are not particularly receptive towards emotions and are not, are able to kind of process this all internally and not really be needing much psychological help, or, are feeling pretty, I don't want to call stable, because stable is not probably the right word, but you are looking for a certain type of personality. I kind of like to call it the robot personality. And I think a lot of the military personnel have that type of personality. But I think in some ways that type of personality is a bit of a myth. Of course, we have people who are a little bit more sensitive and others who are not so sensitive. But personally, if an issue arises on the space station, you are more likely to have a successful mission with somebody who is more open to talking about it, more, like, let's say, aware of their emotions and aware of their feelings, than to somebody who is not. I personally think that individuals who, let's say, are not high in emotional intelligence sometimes run the risk of letting, let's say, stress, anxiety, depression, or anything like that kind of accumulate, and then not really convey that either with mission control or whoever they want to. And then eventually I think it turns into a bigger problem. Whereas let's say people who are, high on emotional intelligence and are pretty aware of their emotions and feelings, can probably detect feelings like that earlier on, and or can detect anxiety or frustration earlier on, and if conveyed, can probably address issues a lot earlier on.
Right. And talking and just taking this point a little further, when you spoke about these particular tests, I totally agree with everything you said in the second half there about probably a little bit more flexibility with personalities, because the moment you did mention that we would be looking for people who would be comfortable alone. And when I say alone, I mean on space missions, you're going to have limited people around you and for long periods of time. But then you do run the risk, and I want to just understand from you, of eliminating 50% of people, because you start with an extrovert and an introvert. So in this case, if that is what we're looking for, then are we saying that the extrovert by default would not be a good candidate, because he's definitely or she's definitely not going to meet a new person on the job every day?
I would not say so. I don't think we have this exclusion of introvert extrovert. I don't think that's a deciding factor, because you can have both introverts and extroverts who are able to cope really well in isolation, because they still have some type of communication on the space station. They have such a busy schedules that actually they have a lot going on. So I would not say we exclude 50%, but the exclusion for me really comes in the vulnerability factor. I think because of the sheer amount of fantastic individuals. And then when I say fantastic, I mean like super highly qualified with 2 or 3 degrees and PhDs and have fantastic careers and expertise wanting to be astronauts. And it's really thousands of them. It automatically puts you in such a high competitions that when you arrive to this screening, you sure as hell are not going to want to show any vulnerability. Like if you go take a psychological test and somebody asks you like, I don't know, do you feel any fear? What do you think if something happens? Do you fear for your life? If they ask you any of those questions where any normal person would naturally feel some fear, I think the likeliness of you admitting, yeah, actually I feel really scared and I don't feel comfortable with absolutely everything that will happen there, um, is quite low, purely because you know that thousands of other amazing people are competing. So for me, that's where we ought to rethink some of that selection, to know that I think people are vulnerable by nature. When you're putting them in such an extreme environment, they're going to be vulnerable by default. So they should be allowed to express that emotionally. I obviously can't really disclose a lot about my work with the astronauts or who exactly I worked with, but um, I did have quite a few of them tell me, like, for example, at the time of my mission or at the time of my training, I couldn't really say this because it didn't fit with the astronaut persona. So the amount of times I've heard this, it didn't fit with the astronaut persona or image, it's quite sad, really. So, we really idealize the astronauts, and they are definitely someone to idealize because they do amazing work and they're really, really inspiring individuals. But I think it's also important for us to understand that they're humans who go in an extremely difficult environments, experience different issues, starting from insomnia to isolation to different types of anxiety, even feeling a little bit homesick, frustration on board or frustration from interpersonal relationships on board. So all of these things are, I would say, quite well documented, that anyone would naturally have some negative feelings or concerns about this. And I think we need to be aware of this and be understanding of this, and not think that this makes an individual unfit to be an astronaut.
All right. And interestingly, you mentioned about the astronaut persona, and I think we all have that image of an astronaut out here with a very strong person in a suit and the Iron Man kind of a character. But I think I agree with you a lot, because if that persona is pushed too far, or if it is not natural within a person, then I think there could be other aspects that come out from this. And I think what is happening today around the world with UAP sightings, probably, and I don't know if you agree with this, is one of the reasons about what you've just said, that in this case, fighter pilots or people from the Navy and the Air Force and pilots uh, were not ready to reveal what they actually saw out there, because of fear that they would be perceived by their seniors as somebody who was probably not on the ball or psychologically needed a little bit of help. And with all these stories now coming out, I think this reinforces what you just said. What is your thought on that?
I would definitely agree. Of course, I can't speak to to other people's opinions on this, and I'm not exactly sure how pilots would be feeling, but I do know from experience that quite a few astronauts come from military backgrounds. So I do want to emphasize that it takes really a special type of personality, very strong personality, who's able to compromise and cope with a lot, because it's by no means easy to live in space, or either like live in the International Space Station. But I have to say that I feel that for sure there still remains almost a taboo around this topic, and we don't feel so comfortable, let's say, hearing like certain type of vulnerability coming from the astronauts. So I would kind of have to agree with that statement, and that's why I try to be an advocate for this, and really express the fact that it's only natural to be experiencing some difficulties in such a harsh environment, and I would really hope that for future missions and in the future, we try to be a little bit more considerate of psychological health, and of course accommodating, in the sense that we provide additional support to astronauts, not only before missions but also during missions and after missions. A lot of my research was focused on post missions, and I would say that there's also a lot of work to be done after missions to make sure that we take care of the people who dedicate their lives to go to space, and find things and innovations to help us on Earth.
Right. And I just want to drive the psychological point back in again because that's really important. And I think it was somewhere in the 1980s where Arthur Frank uh, coined the term overview effect. And the overview effect was in some way connected to or linked to Zen Buddhism, or
Mhm.
what an astronaut feels when he looks out or when he looks down at the globe, or sees the earth in its totality, and the impact it has psychologically on him. Now, I know you've done a lot of work on this. Can you give us a
Yep,
little bit more insight into what the overview effect exactly is?
absolutely. I would say that different researchers perhaps have their own almost definition of the overview effect or their own perception of the overview effect. You rightly said Frank White was the one to coin this term, and I had the pleasure of meeting him and working with him for a very, very brief amount of time. Um, but according to his definition, the overview effect is a shift in perception the astronauts experience when they see Earth from outer space. So the idea is that when astronauts go to space and they see Earth, just as a floating ball before your eyes, where everything everything in the history that you've ever learned about and everyone that's ever existed in your mind is just on this floating rock that's literally right in front of you in the palm of your hand. You get such a psychological shift, and change in the way you think, in the way you perceive the world, and you get almost like an existential crisis. You start asking yourself those big questions: why are we here? Why am I here? Why did I get to see this and not another astronaut? Is there, I don't know, fate? Was it fate? Was it destiny? Do those things exist? You start asking yourself quite spiritual questions. I worked with a person who once told me that they felt like they were God because they were looking at what God should be looking at. They were just looking at basically humanity from above, and it almost feels magical and spiritual. So it provides really just a fundamental shift. You start rethinking life and rethinking your own opinions about life, just from the view, and not only that. Of course, when you see Earth, you realize that it's such a small, let's say, speck of space on the grand font of how big space is. That you realize that, let's say, the only known livable space for us is literally, again, floating right before your eyes, and you could see wildfires, you could see basically the scars that humanity is leaving on Earth, and it makes you really rethink how you want to protect that and make sure that we can keep our planet. I think it's also the fact that astronauts realize very realistically how much of a harsh environment space is and how hard it would be to survive there. So it makes you really want to protect this blue dot that we live in.
Right, the blue dot, like Carl Sagan said. And interestingly, about a week ago, I probably for the first time there was an event somewhere around here, and I was looking at, or we had gone out to, because it was a chance to look out into and see the planets. And I think Saturn is quite visible during this month. So obviously, I've seen Saturn on pictures and television, and followed everything on video. But the first time I looked into that telescope and I could see Saturn, and this time with the rings, it was just a stunning view. I don't think I can ever unsee that again, in spite of me spending my whole life looking at pictures with Saturn, and I knew what I was going to see. There was nothing new. But the fact that I realized looking into that telescope that this was Saturn, I don't call it the overview effect. It could be some effect, but it definitely had that effect. And interestingly, you did mention sometime back, Nicole, that when it comes to space and it comes to protecting this blue dot, now your generation and everything that you are doing are probably the pioneers with what is going to come. And it becomes extremely important that now and at this very stage, people from your generation and generations to come, in some way, set down what exactly are going to be the rules of engagement. And I'm using that word specifically when I talk about rules of engagement, because we now have a race into space, and we are talking about weaponizing space. Now, already, all of us know this is a threat, because the moment you start defining borders and space and weaponry, you start getting into, and you already know that your first step is littered with conflict or potential conflict. How do you see this, and what are your views on this?
I would say I'm not a huge expert on this. So I tend to focus on the, let's say, positive and negative sides of psychological, let's say, well-being in extreme environments. But of course, I attend different conferences and different events where this topic is heavily discussed. And like I said, I don't think I can speak on it with expertise, but what I can say is that it's discussed with a lot of caution and a lot of consideration. I know that this topic is thrown in quite easily by the media, and that's where I want to kind of make this differentiation that, media throws it as if this is happening tomorrow, as if this is happening, I don't know, in the next few years, and I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. I'm not sure if it will ever happen, because even if you're talking to different industries, of course there is a monetary aspect here, and certainly an interest, but I'm not sure that everybody is completely interested in achieving this. I would say that right now the efforts are really much more going towards sustainability, something that we touched upon. Companies and different investors are heavily trying to invest into technologies to get rid of space debris, and to really try to have a more sustainable space environment. So I would say that the efforts are really being more focused into different, like certain positive aspects, rather than focusing on defense. And I think defense will always be an aspect, but I'm certainly not seeing it as the prime focus at the moment. I think there's much more pressing issues right now, such as sustainability, that we need to resolve before even trying to focus on this.
I'm happy that this is what is not being discussed at space conferences, like you said. And I totally agree with you, because when it comes to either social media, or when it comes to uh, somebody who wants either a click or a clickbait, then the topic that gets pulled up first is conflict. And related to conflict, every other subject gets connected to it, whether it's out down here on Earth or whether it's space. But coming to sustainability, because we also spoke a little bit earlier about exploration into space. Now, one part of this is obviously astronauts that are going out there, and it's the fact that we need to move out of this planet. But what about space tourism? And as far as space tourism is concerned, we do know that that area is moving quite quickly as well. Now, when it comes to space tourism, psychologically, is there something that, as a psychologist or as a space psychologist, you or any of your team members or people with your fraternity are involved in developing some kind of protocol or for a common person who's going to space for the first time?
Another very interesting topic. So, in my line of work right now, as you know, I'm the executive director of SGAC. I don't particularly focus right now on space psychology because, let's say, I have my hands full with SGAC. But it's something that it's definitely being discussed and it's definitely being thought about. I think protocols more so would probably have to come from the policy side, but recommendations will definitely have to come from different health experts and not just psychologists, but doctors, different type of doctors to advise on this. I think a very important distinction to make is tourism is going to be fundamentally different from astronauts who go there for longer missions. I myself went recently, thanks to SGAC, on a parabolic flight. So I also got to experience microgravity and do a research project with a colleague of mine from my university. And I got to experience a little bit that environment. And of course, you prepare, but very, very in little ways, not anything like an astronaut would. Now, when you go for tourism, you're not really staying there for long time. You're there a day, I don't know, not that long. You won't be struggling with a lot of the things that astronauts struggle with, purely because your body would just be almost like in shock. So you would have a lot of adrenaline, you would be, super happy, everything would be amazing. So you would not really get down to any of the negative sides that astronauts get to when they stay for a little bit longer. Now, with longer missions, obviously, when you're living on the ISS for a longer time, if you're there for a longer mission, you are really having to change your entire life. I think people don't really consider how hard it is to live there. You are basically rotating around Earth almost 16 times a day. So you're going light, dark, almost 40 minutes. So your circadian rhythm, your sleep cycle is completely disturbed. You, even if you think of hygiene, you don't have running water, so you would not be feeling running water on you for, I don't know, months at a time, which of course really changes your routine. Absolutely every single minute of your day it's scheduled. Not to mention the lack of gravity obviously provides many different restraints. We all know on muscles, on bones, you have to be working out. But what people also don't think about is because of gravity, sometimes you don't feel any pressure. So sometimes in your schedule, you like mission control or your health experts would be giving reminders like, guys, you're not, you don't feel gravity, so you have to remember to go to the toilet. So there's a lot of different consideration that you are literally in this super different environment, and obviously you're super well prepared and trained for it, but it is an adjustment, and it's also a very, very tight space. So a lot of the other issues come from interpersonal conflicts. Crews are always very international, which is fantastic, but this means that you're getting different personalities who come from very different cultural backgrounds and are performing very high level tasks and high level missions, which means that frustration can very easily arise. And when you're in this small space that is very confined, there's nowhere you can really go because you can't really escape to another place. And then combine this with certain anxieties, or after a long time, if you're missing your family or anything like that, then the combination of those things, I guess, then drive towards any negative, if any, issues. Now, with space tourism, it's quite different. You go, I would not say on a holiday, but on a trip, something that you're very excited about. You're not thinking about performing different missions that are often very hard. So all the astronauts are performing scientific experiments on their day is full of actual scientific work. So tourism would not be like that. You just go to enjoy. You get to see this fantastic view. So I suspect a lot of the negative effects or things that we need to consider carefully we probably won't need to consider so carefully when we're talking about tourism. I think certainly the physical strain on the body, so more so on the medical side, and medical doctors will probably need to think about this quite a lot more. But psychologically, I think the two are quite different.
Right. And you just spoke about a person that is going to space or an astronaut, and that's where you help. And you'd probably talk about acclimatization and getting somebody used to that. Now, you also mentioned that there are difficult situations that could come up while they are in space. That's one part of it. Can you give us a little bit of insight into what happens once an astronaut actually comes back down to Earth? Because we know a lot about de-acclimatization as far as physical aspects are concerned, and we've read a lot about that. But maybe a lot of people listening to us, or me personally, I wouldn't really know how a person is taken through post landing or post getting back home. Let's call it getting back home. And how long does that process take?
Oh, it's probably my favorite question. I love talking about this because it's something that I never see anyone talking about. And for me, it's really important. I have said it many times that we need to provide support before, during, and particularly after space missions. When we're thinking about it psychologically, of course, before is purely training, prevention. During the mission, it's really adjustment. Any, let's say, urgent things are addressed. And then after the mission, I think people forget that actually there is some type of impact. We've already heard about the overview effect. So there's a really huge positive impact. I think, get this strength and wish to really protect Earth and be an advocate for sustainability, or making sure that there's peace. A lot of astronauts say that, when they see Earth, they just see one ball. They don't see different borders. They don't see different nations. So I think for sure they come back and feel a lot more united. But one thing that I haven't seen others talk about is, I would say, a type of existential crisis, that you realize that you've just basically completed your dream, something that you've worked for your entire life, you've waited for, you've trained for, you have worked so hard to achieve this one thing, and it has been your sole mission or goal for such a long time. You achieve it, and then you come back, and then it almost feels like nothing can ever compare. It just feels like, okay, what do I do now? What can compare? I know I reached the peak. This is for sure the peak. Unless I go back, I don't know what else will give me that high feeling or give me this amazing feeling. So you almost feel kind of lost, like I just did this amazing thing and now I don't know what will top that up or what I should do next. So I think there's this period of adjustment of, not knowing what comes next. Of course, I think almost every astronaut wants to spread the word and be an advocate, and make sure that they share with the different generations about their experience and about what space is like, which is fantastic. But I think that's something that I have not seen talk about, and I have to say have heard from different astronauts, is this sense of really looking for um, something else to do, or looking for another peak to reach. And I've read different biographies who, let's say, are dealing with this matter, and different things that astronauts are doing, different ways they have found to still be connected to space. But I would say this is a huge adjustment. So it's almost like looking for another purpose, which you have to understand, for such driven individuals, it's not an easy task.
Exactly. And do they tend to continue to stay focused on the space dream, or with driven individuals like this? Do they tend to go then out for the next challenge and start from zero again, uh, uh, in another area of either research or pushing themselves? Or do they tend to keep focused and helping other individuals that are probably ready to go out on a mission or people who've come back from a mission?
I think, again, I can't exactly give details on the people that I've worked with, but this for me really depends per individual. I have really found that different people find different things meaningful for their missions, and it can be really the smallest thing, something that you would never think about that they find super meaningful, and suddenly their entire life makes sense, and they find this to be the reason why they got to be an astronaut, why they got to space, and suddenly they turn it into their mission. And then other people who, want something completely new. So they, want to be, I don't know, traveling now the world, or be a tour guide, or now go to teaching, or be doing different things, or go climb Everest or another peak to reach. So for me, it's really different per individual. But let's say the unifying factor is something that they find meaningful. I think it has to feel meaningful because, being an astronaut, it's so purposeful. I think you have to be ready to give your life to be an astronaut. And there's a really fantastic let's say, I can't remember if it was an interview or a book, but I remember hearing this or reading this from an astronaut who was saying that if he was told that he had a 50-50% chance of dying or making it, even before the shuttle had gone, he would have still chosen to go, because the fear of not getting there was bigger than the fear of death. And that for me was so significant, that you have to be able to risk everything, because that's how big your dream is, and that's how much you want to get there. So you need to find something equally as meaningful, to feel fulfilled. And I think a lot of people get this feeling when they are contributing to make a difference to their community or to other individuals. And then, like I said, there's others who just want to do something completely different, and make sure that they're experiencing different things in life.
Right. And for a lot of people listening to us right now, Nicole, I'm sure that intrinsically we all know whether I was built to be an astronaut or not, or whether I have the aptitude or whether I have the behavior. Now, when it comes to space and space exploration, the astronaut is obviously the big headline. But there are a lot of other people around there that are making sure that the astronaut is safe, the astronaut looks good, the astronaut eats the right food. And what I'm getting to is the ancillary avenues around it. Because I may not be cut out to be an astronaut. However, I do not need to lose hope, because when it comes to space and space exploration, there are so many avenues out there that people and students and listeners to this particular podcast would be interested in. And for example, you are currently in the field of psychology and contributing in whatever way you can. What do you think are the other avenues open out there? And do you think that this space industry as a whole is one way that is in the future going to open up so many more opportunities and jobs to be more inclusive? People can actually now come out and contribute from different parts of the world, and obviously with with different ideas, and like you said, it has to be collaborative, right?
Absolutely. I think the opportunities are infinite. I think, at least in Bulgarian, there's a saying, "It takes a village," and it kind of applies to space as well. It really takes a huge amount of effort for so many people and different teams to get an astronaut in space. So there's different avenues to get involved. There's really huge teams behind the missions who are ensuring every single little detail, and trying to make sure that they feel as comfortable as possible, even if you're not studying something related to space. I mean, I was studying psychology, and you wouldn't think psychology would be applicable to space, but it is. And really, if you think about any profession, it could probably be applying to space. We already know the big ones, of course: engineering, law, medicine. But other ones, such as nutrition, we need nutritionists. You need to know what would be the best foods for these astronauts to send to space. You need teams to tailor those foods and make sure that the astronauts' preferences are incorporated to that. Even fashion, you need to know the best materials most comfortable for the astronauts, because this is not, the same for every single person. You really can be applying this to any job. I feel that anything that is related to humans in some capacity or some type of performance can really be applied to space. So I feel that it could really be opening many career opportunities. I don't think those career opportunities exist yet. So as I've been talking, I'm very passionate about extreme environment psychology, and not only space. This, of course, includes other environments, submarines and Antarctica, even athletes or mountain hikers. So it can be different extreme environments. But is there necessarily let's say an ideal job for me? I wouldn't say so, unless you're working directly with one, let's say, astronaut center or Antarctica Institute. It's quite hard for you to find a job. So it's really up to us to be creating those jobs, creating those ideas, because I think for sure the space sector will be needing them in the future. So I would really advise the listeners, if they're interested and have some type of idea, to try to pursue it and make sure that they share their ideas, because I think there's a strong need. So even if it's not, let's say, a career that is directly related to space, I'm sure there is some type of application that can be used.
Also, when we were talking about this particular avenue and coming down to space, and specifically people that were interested in taking this up as a career, and you were speaking about psychology. Now, when it comes to extreme environment, what you just spoke about, is there a particular kind of individual that tends to push towards these challenges when it comes to extreme environment? And is this connected to, in some way or the other, a person pushing that boundary further and then going for the goal that probably nobody else is achieving or is the most difficult to achieve? So what I'm getting at is it the goal that is elusive, or is it the extreme condition that is attractive?
Interesting question. And I'm not quite sure, because I don't have the, let's say, research on that. I'm not even sure if it's done. But I could definitely share an observation that for me, a lot of the people who are driven towards extreme environments are not because they're attracted to the extreme environment, but it's really attracted to a curiosity. It's attracted to wanting to know what is beyond, what is there, what can I find out, what can I see. I think almost every single astronaut that I have spoken to, even in personal capacity, has such a big curiosity. And not even astronauts and space explorers, but other scientists, other amazing, successful space professional and executives. I've had the opportunity and pleasure of meeting, different heads of agencies, different directors and executives. And I feel that every single time I have met somebody, at such a high level, and almost before you meet them, you definitely idealize them, and then you meet them and they tell you about their path. I can sense this, curiosity, which ultimately drives you. I think you want to find out, you want to do better, you want to do more, and I think there's no better motivation than that. I think certainly in a personal capacity, I think that's what's driven me. I think I already mentioned I recently had the opportunity to go on a parabolic flight and experience microgravity, and I was super scared. I don't know how I said yes, but I was so scared, but I really wanted to know what it would be like, and I had such a big sense of curiosity. And I one day would love to move back to Bulgaria and do my PhD with our Antarctica Institute and potentially go there. And I'm sure that if that happens, or when that happens, I will be very scared. But I know that really it's going to be that sense of curiosity and wanting to know and wanting to find things out that will be driving me. And I think ultimately it's how all of these individuals have been growing and evolving, and it's that drive that's has been inside of them and allowing them to really persevere through difficult situations. Because I think really trying to achieve anything significant comes with its difficulty. So it's the people that persevere through it who, in the end, make it. And you need to have some type of internal motivation driving you in order for you to not give up.
Right. And Nicole, we also know that you have worked with NASA on certain projects. Now, how has that experience been for you? How has the learning experience been, and how has that helped you personally as far as your psychological journey is concerned, as far as your clinical research is concerned, and how has that aligned you better, probably, for what is to come?
Yeah. So SGAC works with NASA a lot. NASA and ESA, let's say, as some of the bigger agencies, are one of our bigger supporters. And I have to say that working with them is truly inspirational. The people that both agencies and not only them have, it's remarkable. I think every single time I speak to some of their experts, speak to, the speak about the work that they're doing, you almost feel unqualified. So I think that's, let's say, gives you almost the competitive factor here, because of how accomplished people are, the fantastic projects that they're doing, the amazing things that they're investigating. I think it's truly inspirational. And not only NASA and ESA, but all of these agencies and institutions, they're not thinking about today. They're working on projects for 10, 15, 20 years into the future. So I think almost when you get to work with a lot of these entities, the conversations you're having are not about now, they're about the future. And it makes you feel so significant, because the decisions being made now are about the years to come. And it's very, very impactful. And I think it's a fantastic way for us to think about things. How will it affect future generations? It's of course something that SGAC also focus on. But those huge agencies, of course, are heavily investing into finding out solutions for the future, doing different missions, different projects to try to find even replacements for, I don't know, food and water and different things. Don't quote me on that because I can't name the exact research here, but really the projects that they're doing are absolutely amazing. So I think the more you meet inspirational people like that, and I've had the pleasure of really having a fantastic opportunity to meet a lot of them, the more driven you've become, the more you want to do things, the more you want to achieve. So I think personally it's impacted me very, very positively. And I'm sure it's been the same for others. And I think in the end, that's why we try to have different speakers from agencies and industry, so that they can also inspire our members and have the same positive impact on them.
Right. And Nicole, you've been very generous with your time. But before we let you go, a couple of questions from me here, and I would just want to know what your outlook on this is. So, if we were to ask you, which is your favorite space film, and why is it your favorite space film?
Oh my God. This is not going to be a serious one, but it's super old. I think it's a three-part movie, or like three films from Disney, and they're called Xenon, or like The Adventures of Xenon. And it's about a girl who lives on the ISS and her life there, and like different adventures she has. And I don't remember in my conscious life being interested in space until I got to university and started researching and being more interested in space psychology. But as a child, I remember being obsessed with this with these movies. They were my favorite. It was probably like a subconscious I don't know, desire to go to space or subconscious interest. But obviously, growing up in Bulgaria, we didn't really have much of a space sector, so I didn't really think that space was an option for me. And then I was thinking about this, recently. I think I was doing another interview or something like that, and I think this question popped up for somebody else, and then I started thinking about what my own answer would be, and I remembered that this was one of my absolutely favorite films, which is it's just wild because I had no actual idea of what space is or how things work in space, who goes to space, but I remember being obsessed with those three films.
Right. So, in a way, you are carrying forward the adventures of Xenon. If it was a few years ago, you are carrying. So, this fourth, fifth, and sixth episode probably currently on. And now, before we let you go, Nicole, this time, for people listening, and when I say people, I've just probably mentioned to you that it's between the age group of 12, 14, and 24, 25. What would be your advice to them on how should they chart this course? And decide early? Is there a way that you can decide early whether this is for you? Because that could be an early warning signal that you may be going in the wrong direction. Or is there no early warning signal and you keep following your path? And some, like you said, at an early stage, you did not know till you watched the adventures of Xenon that you would be interested in space. So how does a young kid listening to us or growing up in college or university know when it's time for them to make that decision?
For me, it's really just trying it. I think unless you try it, you can't know if you like it or not. I've certainly tried many things, even in psychology, but also in space, different projects that I wasn't totally into. I realized that I might not really like it, especially getting into the more technical stuff. I just knew it wasn't for me, but I didn't know that until I tried it. Otherwise, it sounded super cool and I really wanted to get involved. Then I got involved and I said, this is completely not for me. But for me, unless you try something, you can't really know. And that would be, I guess, my second message is that don't wait until you feel prepared to try something, because you will never feel prepared. I think almost everything I've done, I have never felt prepared to do it. I didn't feel prepared to be the executive director of SGAC. I didn't feel prepared when I was doing my parabolic flight. I didn't feel prepared when I was doing my first interview or first podcast. Most of the time, you're gonna feel unprepared when you're doing something new, and that's completely normal. And that doesn't mean you were gonna do it badly, but you will never have that feeling like I am completely prepared now and that's when I'm going to do it. So my advice is for people to just take a leap, contact whoever you can to get involved. People are very open. I think the space sector is quite friendly. You have very high level people responding and wanting to mentor and wanting to help. It's quite tight knit community. So I think everybody is trying to be supportive and involved, and just try. I really wouldn't put it off and be questioning, is it a right decision? I think I mentioned at the start of the podcast that I think for me, one of the fundamental things has been having the right mentors and people to ask for advice, especially with different decisions. And I, of course, have different ideas or certain things I would like to do in the future. And I remember I was in DC and sharing that with somebody that I really look up to, perhaps one of the biggest, let's say, stakeholders in the Bulgarian space industry. And I was telling him, like, I really don't know how I would make this happen. I feel like this is not ready and that is not ready. And he has like a super well established and successful company, and he was like, well, what do you have to lose? Like right now at this stage, like what if you do it, what do you lose? And I just stood there and I was like, I have no idea. I mean, he was like, you might lose some time, you will lose a little money, but you will lose nothing else. And it just hit me that by trying to build myself up to make any decision, I'm basically just losing my time. And even if I try it, it probably will fail, but the likeliness of me losing anything, it's not that high right now. I mean, I don't have, a family to depend on me or employees to depend on me. I don't really have to consider that much of a risk, talking about, outside of SGAC. Obviously, when it's related to SGAC is different, but taking personal risk, it's not that bad. So I would just advise people to consider that and take a leap and try to get involved and do something, even if they don't feel prepared.
Right. And Nicole, I think it's getting late there in Bulgaria because we started and there was sun through the window behind you. I could see daylight, and it's now the sun has set and it's dark there. But is there anything interesting for India coming up with what you all are doing? Any events that you want to let us know about?
Yeah, so we don't really have on, let's say, the agenda an event coming up in India, but we have a number of other events coming up. I mentioned SGC in Milan. Then we'll be having a lot of other local and regional events, and of course, any members who would like to get involved and perhaps propose an event, we would love to hold an event in India. I think we did 2 years ago, and we would love to do another one, perhaps in collaboration with the IAF and the coming up GLEX conference. So always opportunities to get involved, and would love to have another event in India. So nothing on the schedule right now, but hopefully soon in the future. And for anybody who's listening and wants to get involved, even on an international level, and is interested in our opportunities and scholarships, please just have a look at our website. Becoming a member it's completely free. It takes maybe 5 minutes, and you'll get access to all our opportunities. So if you are interested, please join us, and feel free to have a look at our website and the different opportunities we have on there.
Great. Now that you've spoken to Indian Genes, Nicole, rest assured, we will do something. Either the listeners that are listening to this podcast or we at Indian Genes will definitely plan something to have all of you down, and probably a nice big event in India as well. But once again, Nicole, on behalf of all our listeners here, space enthusiasts, and if there were no space enthusiasts before this particular podcast, people have heard us speaking and heard you speaking. So I'm sure you have few more space enthusiasts now. But on behalf of everyone here in India on Indian Genes, we do hope that probably we can have you back again, speak to us at some time, or whenever you choose to come back, you can dial us or call us. And Indian Genes is always here and ready to spread the message of space exploration for everybody who's interested. So thank you once again, Nicole, and thank you for being our guest.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's been such a pleasure, and I hope the listeners enjoyed.